Jesse with Defense Mechanisms. Wanted to take a few minutes today to talk to you guys about weapon-mounted white lights, some pros and cons of some of the most common lights in the industry, and why we use what we use.
Yeah, so I guess let's start off kind of most affordable option out there, something that we see pretty regularly at class, the Streamlight HLX. I guess that's their new 1,000 lumen series of their light. Why don't you walk us through some of the cons of the HLX?
Yeah, so right here we have the HLX handheld, but the weapon light, which is what we're talking about for weapon light use, it's the same head, it's a slightly different tail cap and body system, but it's set up for scout mount just like everything else. The HLX really is kind of the best of the worst when it comes to weapon lights, right? It's probably the most functional, affordable weapon light, but it has some downsides. So one of the problems that we see with the HLX lights is they're dual fuel style lights, so they use 123s or an 18650 battery. And we see a lot when guys are using 123 batteries with this light that there's not enough pressure inside the light, and so there's battery bounce, and so they'll get flickering and intermittent lighting. And so we really recommend, if you are running an HLX light, that you run it with an 18650 battery. We see that makes a big difference. The other problem that we see a lot with HLX lights is they come with a tape switch tail cap that people want to use, but we see a lot of failures with that tape switch tail cap system. And so if you're going to run an HLX, we really recommend you run it off the tail cap. The other obvious, kind of downsides of this light is it can't keep up with some of the very high output lights that we're seeing. Today we're going to be comparing some very high output lights. This light just can't keep up, but realistically, for the $100, $110, $20 that you're paying for this light, there's a lot of light here.
For sure.
For the budget, and realistically, if that's what your budget is, this is the light. Like if your budget's under $125, this is the light for you. But you got to run it with 18650s. You got to run it off the tail cap. But it's just not going to punch out as far as some of these high-end lights. Lower candela, it's not going to punch through fog and smoke and other photonic barriers, stuff like that. But realistically, it is the best of the worst. What are your thoughts about the HLX?
Yeah, I think some serious pros of the HLX, right, is affordability. It comes as a complete package, right? So you're getting all that stuff included with it. And I think it as an entry-level light, it definitely performs, like you said. Make sure you're using it with the 18650s. There's, I think it's Cowan has a good video on pulling the spring a little bit to make sure that you're getting good contact there. But, like you said, this is the light that I see go down at class the most, right? So whether that be just a standard rifle class, shoothouse classes, I tend to see the highest failure rate out of the HLX, right? Even compared to their previous models where they had like the 600 lumen model, that actually didn't seem to have as many failure points, whereas the HLX definitely does. Like you said, I think light hue is another kind of downside of this Streamlight, right? Like a very bluish tone. And as we start to get to environmental factors, things like that, just a warmer tone of light tends to punch through that a little bit better. I think they have a decent amount of, hot spot versus spill. You tend to see that, like some companies, especially in the more budget realm, favor one higher than the other, right? And I think there's a good balance there with this Streamlight. Like you said, making you use kind of the protected cells with the, the actual charger in there is a little inconvenient, as they tend to be a little bit more expensive than the standard unprotected cells. But all in all, I think as a entry level budget option, it's pretty decent.
Kind of stepping up from the HLX, we jump into Surefire's dual fuel. This is off their popular Scout Light brand, their Scout line. This is a 1500 lumen model, I believe, and a lot of the things that we don't like about the Streamlight start to get fixed when you get into the Scout. Surefire has a whole suite of tape switches for this that, though a consumable item, tape switches by their nature are consumable, is a vastly more robust system than what's available with the Streamlight system. So the Surefire light has a lot more tail caps, tape switches available, a lot more support for it. which is a good thing, and it's quality parts. The Surefire also handles dual fuel a lot better. There's not battery bounce problems with 123s like there is with the Streamlight, so that gives you the options if a 123 is a better battery choice for your application. The Surefire lets you run it in a reliable way that you can count on. But realistically, when it comes to light output, I would say it shares a lot of the same kind of strengths and weaknesses of the HLX. There's 1500 out the front lumens, but it's not very high in candela, so that light is not focused and punching into distance. And so it's also very cool blue light, which kind of run into some of the same issues with photonic barriers being glass or smoke or fog. Additional other lights you're trying to punch past. It just doesn't have that kind of power from some of the more high output lights that we're going to talk about. Anything I missed on the dual fuel?
As we start to talk, we talk about like heat sink, right? So I think the Streamlight actually handles heat sink pretty well, right? You can turn that light on. Battery tends to last forever, right? Like I've had that light turn on in my pocket before. It takes a while before you actually notice like, oh shit, then my light's on in my pocket. Same thing as the light starts to heat up, right? What I noticed about the Surefire is as I would leave that light on constant on for a minute, you could tell as the light started to heat up, the quality of the light and the output of the light started to diminish, right? It started to step back because of that heat sink. The same thing tends to happen with tape switches with Surefire, right? Like if I'm just using the tail cap, I tend to get better output of the light, more power from that light than if I put a tape switch on there as well. It starts to bleed back a little bit. So I think, the big downside other than, hue and temperature of the light, obviously having that extreme candela, is also just heat sink in the Surefires. It tends to be kind of the worst of this bunch, so. But like good reputable name of Surefire, obviously been around for a long time. Lots of aftermarket support. I mean, everything is kind of built off of that. So, diving next, got into Mod-Lite. You want to walk us through that?
So here we have Mod-Lite has a number of different heads. We have their new and current production PLH V2. We have previous generation PLH and the previous head style in their OKW. We don't have an OKW in the new style. And all these light heads are different. We'll talk about those. Notice we have them on handheld bodies because that's how we had been using them. We have a lot of Mod-Lite bodies on our rifles, but it's a lot more convenient to talk to you about this. Same head goes on the rifle body, so that's not part of the conversation, right? What Mod-Lite has basically done is they have souped up the Surefire style lights, right? They've taken and made their own Scout style bodies that work with the dual fuel head. With the Mod-Lite head is compatible with dual fuel bodies, so they made more streamlined bodies with a more streamlined Scout mount system, kind of more in line almost with how the Arasaka bodies are. So they make their own bodies. They're really nice. They're streamlined. Their own tail caps. They've just taken the whole Surefire light and made a souped up version of that light. So all their products are compatible with the Surefire products, which is really convenient. We talked about the depth of the Surefire product support and tape switches and tail caps. All of that stuff works with the Mod-Lite, which is really convenient. And then they've come out with a head that just puts a lot more output from that same battery source. Now they're running exclusively 18650 or 18350 if you get their tiny little bodies. We tend to not recommend the 18350 bodies. They're very small, and the result is just that the runtime is short. Guys like them because they make their overall package on the rifle short. But when you start to get into long room clearing operations, like we do a lot of low light CQB in large buildings, and we can be in a run for 20-30 minutes, and that's just a run. That's not real life where you're held up outside of doors. You have to hold security after you're doing secondary searches, right? That's a training operation, and so we really prefer the longer runtime that we get from 18650 batteries. But the Mod-Lite heads really do up the performance from the Surefire. And it's that same kind of cool color temperature, which is still all the same negatives about that, where it doesn't quite hit photonic barriers, it doesn't punch through quite as well, glass, fog, smoke, that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more candela in these heads, and they do punch a lot farther. And the PLH V2 is a fantastic blend of flood and spill. You really get that light punched out there, but it also is lighting up a large area. So we in the past used these a lot for CQB, where they would give us a lot of light to punch into. You know, if we had open doors into multiple rooms, we could punch light deep into those spaces while also really lighting up the room that we were in. The original PLH was a little more spill and didn't punch as deep, and so it's a really good upgrade that they did to the V2, where their OKW head is less total out the front lumens, but more focused, higher candela, and it pushes a lot of light downrange, and so it's kind of the preferred light pretty much in the industry right now for long range use, for white light long range. It just gives you the best, most focused hotspot push down range as a result of that high candela. What I forget it?
No, I think, like you said, the Mod Light to me was like the souped up Surefire. What I really liked about Mod Light is they were keeping that small, thin package, especially as we start to talk about, cloud, and kind of as they come out with lights, they're always beefier in the beginning, right? Absolutely. So having that nice streamlined package, obviously working with all the support from Surefire from the past. What I did notice about the Mod Light is it tends to heat up a little bit faster. It's like that Surefire where, a little bit less material up here starts to heat up, especially if you're running it handheld and it turns on accidentally in the pocket. A little bit.
Singed a few hairs doing that.
And like some of these, we start to talk about like button activation, and I tend to find that the Mod Light button was a little bit softer for application in the rear than some of these other options, not as a tactile of a click on it. But the other downside that I've seen is when my battery started to drain off on my Mod Light, and again, I don't know if it was just my model or this is a common issue, but as it would start to drain off, I would get like intermittent where it would start to cut out a little bit. It'd be like and strobe for me for a second, then it would come back on, but it was definitively stepped down in power. So usually that was just a simple battery change, and then I'd be back up for a little bit of time. It seemed like the Mod Light for me actually ate batteries the fastest as well. Like I tended to change out a lot more than the other lights that I have here. So moving on, I think Cloud, again, full disclosure, we're good friends with Matt and Sean over at Cloud. We've been using Cloud lights, from fucking the early days. So some bias there and just friends. But also, I think what sets Cloud apart is they're actually out there training, right? They're end user generated products that they're taking feedback from the guys that are using their lights, and they're implementing it into their actual lights. So cons of kind of Cloud, as I said earlier, when they first come out, they always tend to be beefier than all other lights, right? But what that is it's just an overbuilt light, right? They're using tool steel in there. Again, things that we've tested is shooting it with UTM up close, and they've done smart things like replaceable lenses and, again, tool steel bezel, stuff like that. And I think once you start to like really look at, temperature, spill versus hot spot, temperature of the light, battery bounce and how they deal with that issue. And then as we start to get into tape switch, you'll start to see this is where like Cloud kind of sets themselves apart, right? So, obviously right here is the Rain V1. What I really like about the V1 is obviously color tone of the light, right? Same with the old Owl. They were using a different LED back then, and it just gave you a really good yellow light. And what we find about yellow light, just like the old incandescent P60 bulbs of the Surefire, is they tend to punch through that atmospheric conditions much better, right? So if you're shooting in cold, you get that heat, coming out the gases of the muzzle, it clogs the air. Well, that yellow light's gonna punch through that a lot better. Dust, pollen, we get into these buildings that got all sorts of dust and stuff on the ground. As we start getting teams moving through there, it kicks that dust up in the atmosphere. That yellow light's gonna punch through that much better than that blue light. It tends to reflect off of all of those particles and kind of get it right there in your face, right?
Just to jump in, another key difference with light temperature is the more yellow temperature that we get out of these rains tends to give us more depth at the things that we're looking at. As we shine our light on our targets, it's a softer light, and we get to see like the contours and shadows of that target. It's easier to see things in depth. What I find with the blue light, the cooler color temperature light, is a little more harsh. Mm-hmm. And as I shine it on a target, it kind of washes all those shadows away, and it makes things look flat. And it's hard for me to, I can identify targets so much better under this yellow light. It allows me to see the shape and the movement and the shadows of things. I find it way easier for me to read downrange with the yellow light compared to the blue light that we get from basically all these other lights.
Yeah, even color's more natural, right? Like to be able to pick out blacks and greens and things like that, it tends to be easier on the eyes under the yellow light. Tint of vehicles, right? Tends to punch through that tint much better than the bluer light. As we move in, I think good tactile button on here. Again, very solid, has the momentary or constant click. As we start to take this apart, you'll notice that there's like a battery jack in here, which allows you to screw that battery down, which then prevents against battery bounce, allows you to use both protected and unprotected batteries. And all of their heatsink is done in the actual, the programming of the head. So what you tend to notice with Cloud is you're not going to get that step off as much under heatsink. Same thing with the their cables. One of the only companies that has a separate, the switch is actually a separate thing. So you could turn this light on, literally cut this switch, right, and then still use the use the constant on button in the back. So just pretty innovative in the way that they're doing things. Obviously, their warranty's great. I think they're doing a great job when it comes to again that focus of the spill versus the hot spot on what we're actually looking to do with these rifle rated lights. And they're constantly evolving, right? So again, as we look at Rain 1.0, here's 2.0, and I know for a fact that they're already working on other evolutions of that, and again, excited to be able to get those. So for me, right now, as far as rifle light goes, I've definitely been preferring the Cloud lights. They've just been performing, again, it's kind of taken the fun out of some of the low light with just the ability of some of these lights out there today. So, pretty impressed. Again, I don't think you're going to be sad if you really go with any of these lights, but, my main preference is going to be the Clouds right now.
And I really appreciate how the guys at Cloud constantly listen to user feedback, right? I've been teasing Matt that he makes a fat light for a handful of years now, and when the Owl first came out, obviously is a very chunky, it was a very chunky light. I feel akin to it a little bit, but so teasing him about that. And then when the Rain 1 came out, it's very similar to the HLX in size. It's a little bit longer, obviously because of the battery jack and stuff like that, but continued to tease him about size. And with this Rain V2, I really can't be upset about the Rain 2. It's very similar in size to the dual fuel, right? The overall package is just so slightly longer, and that is absolutely a result of that battery jack technology, the ability to tighten that up. And that's fantastic. I mean, that's a fantastic idea. Who would have, and no one's done that before. Everyone's just thrown a spring in there and hoped it would work out. So these guys are absolutely listening to what their customers have to say. Their biggest critics, their biggest fans, right? But I'm very impressed with their lights. I like the temperature. Nothing's going to get me to switch off that. And somebody else comes out with a really yellow light, I got to take a look. But until then, I'm really into the yellow light temperature. I think it makes a huge difference in my ability to PID downrange. And then obviously the ability to punch through photonic barriers, all that other stuff that we've talked about 100 times already. It just puts this light at the top for me, no question.
No doubt. Yeah, again, same with the clocking of the actual switch, right? It makes it nice and easy to be able to put that, obviously with then, the built-in ability to hide your cables and stuff like that. Like, again, just well thought out and still in the same budget of, kind of all of these lights. Like, I think those are coming in higher. Obviously, Streamlight much lower, very comparable in price here, so. Yeah, I think that about does it. If you guys got any question on lights or anything else gear related, hit us up at contact@defensemechanisms.com. We'll catch you in the next video.